The saint whose memory we celebrate today is very enigmatic. Saint Martin of Tours. I would say, aligning to the gospel, that this was practically part of what inspired him to dedicate his life to Christ. He was a son of an army commander, so he himself also became part of the army. He was born in Hungary, what is now modern Hungary, but he grew up in Italy. And just to complete a picture of his life, he became an evangelizer of France. So France has him as its patron saint. But early on, when he was serving in the army, when he was already drafted for training in the army, he suddenly changed his mind. And he would say, "I have a new commander. And that commander is Christ." They felt, this is one of the crucial legends that changed his course of life, they felt he was just a coward. He did not want to go to the war. So they singled him out, punished him for being a coward. And he said, "All right, to prove that I'm not a coward, in this same war, put me in front without weapons." What I mean is unprotected. And of course, his military superiors wanted that, to put him in front, unarmed and without protection. But the enemy rescinded the attack. The enemy surrendered in that sense. So there was no war. But he was drafted out of the army. And because of that, he proceeded to France to dedicate himself to a life of being a hermit, of dedicating himself to his new commander, Jesus Christ. On the way, he saw a beggar, scantily clad beggar. So immediately he divided his cloak. He divided it into two and gave the other half to the beggar. That night he had a dream. He saw Jesus Christ wearing the other half of his cloak and saying to everybody in heaven, "Martin, he's just a catechumen. He's very young. He's not even yet baptized. He gave me this." From that time on, that other half of the cloak became a relic. This is the first time we are considering something that is not part of the body, a relic. And that was also the beginning of the two words. So you will memorize Martin of Tours by these two words. The priest in charge of the relic would be called a capellanum. That's the start. In French, chaplain. That's the start of the word chaplain. Up to now, we use the word chaplain. Who's the chaplain of the pilgrimage? Who's the chaplain of the army? And the little house that houses the relic is called a capella. So now, we call our prayer houses chapels. Chaplains and chapels from that time on became associated with, from the time of Saint Martin of Tours. By the way, this is in the 4th century. This is already very old. But this lore, this devotion, this hagiography or sacred stories revolving around of Saint Martin of Tours did not only happen in the past, it even happens in contemporary time. Imagine France. What do you remember with France aside from the Arc of Triumph? Maybe, for some of you, French wine. Even French wine is associated with Martin of Tours. Because the region, Tours, Touraine wine, is one of its top producers and top quality wine. What do you remember about wine? French wine. Maybe you will associate it with some French words like Cabernet. That's it. That's one. Cabernet Franc. One of the best red wines from the Touraine region, from Tours. Or maybe you would say Sauvignon. That's another one. Sauvignon Blanc. Of course, we're now talking of wines. Cross them together so you have Cabernet Sauvignon, also from that region. And they would associate it with, because he became a bishop of Tours. And the bishop would promote the diocese, including its products, wine. So it's associated with Martin of Tours. So from old lore to even contemporary French wine, you have Martin of Tours. But what specifically did he contribute to the church, to doctrine, to the faith? Also a lot. He fought the heresy Arianism. A heresy that would say Jesus Christ was not really God, but just man. If he worked wonders, if he worked miracles, it was because God was operating in him. That kind of explanation is a heresy. That is Arianism. Perhaps you do not have that in Indonesia, I do not know. You do not have those sects. In the Philippines, that one is a very strong non-Catholic, actually non-Christian church, calling itself by the name Iglesia ni Cristo, Church of Christ, which actually does not believe in the divinity of Christ. Saint Martin of Tours combated that heresy not only in France, but also in Spain, also in Italy, where he preached. When he arrived in Tours, aside from establishing one of the first hermitages in the entire world, in the entire history of Western Catholicism, he he placed himself under the tutelage of one of the ancient doctors of the church, Hilary of Poitiers. Hilary, the Bishop Hilary, a doctor of the church, was combating Arianism. And he suffered for it. He was even tortured for it. But he stood up to it. And so, my brothers and sisters, when Martin of Tours died in his old age, of course, he was much acclaimed. By the way, he did not like to be a bishop. That's another story. He declined being bishop. He did not like to go to the diocese to take possession of his seat. So they made a ruse. They asked somebody to tell him that his wife, a very prominent citizen, his wife was dying, needed the last sacraments. Of course, he would not deny the last sacraments. So he left his house, his hermitage, to proceed to the city to anoint. He was still far off the city. People already came and acclaimed him to be a bishop. So he became bishop by acclamation. So when he died, people began the devotion to Saint Martin of Tours. So as soon as his death, he was also acclaimed to be saint. In the Catholic, in our history, first among these saints who were not martyrs. So you see, in the first 4 centuries, our martyrs were almost always, our saints were almost always martyrs. Here's somebody who is not a martyr, who was not martyred, but acclaimed saint. Also breaking record by his life and by his death. Let us pray, my dear friends, that we may have the courage, the passion, and the faith of Bishop Martin of Tours, that we may be able to look at ourselves as embodying the faith when we are able to instruct others who do not have a correct understanding of the faith or who do not have faith in Jesus himself. By this, we become evangelizers, not just of the Western world, but of our part of the world, Asia, Southeast Asia for that matter, where Christ, his name, has yet to be known far and wide.